Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Hopefully, we're going to give you a very instructive and informative next 60 minutes. Just by way of introductions, my name is Justin Leonard. I'm the Global Head of Cloud Transformation here at Exclusive Networks. And today I'm going to be joined by Brian Burns, and TC Wong from Cloudian, and So Kiat Hong from Rubrik. So from an agenda perspective, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the key market trends. Going to give Cloudian and Rubrik the opportunity to introduce themselves if you're not familiar with them and what they do. And then they're going to dive into a little bit more detail around cloud data management, and how what they bring together can really enhance what you're trying to achieve. We're going to wrap up towards the end, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. So if I just start by positioning Exclusive Networks for you, for those who may or may not be familiar with us. We're about a $2.5 billion US dollar company based on our revenues last year, privately owned, based out of a corporate HQ in Paris, and we have grown quite significantly over the last 10 years or so, through organic growth and also via acquisition, and we're now operating in well over 100 countries that cover the EMEA, North America, and of course the APAC region. So a truly global organization. We are the world's largest specialist cybersecurity and cloud distributor. We've got a truly unique vision. We're very specialist and very laser focused in our approach when it comes to bringing cybersecurity and cloud together. And we have a specialist structure that enables us to be able to provide opportunities and capabilities like this to the market, where we can really drive the value of the vendor partnerships that we manage. So that's who Exclusive are in a nutshell. I'm now going to shift forward and talk a little bit about a couple of the key market trends that we're seeing that will hopefully frame this conversation. And I think where better to start, we're in 2020, and I don't think that you could start a presentation this year without mentioning COVID-19, coronavirus. And I think it's really apparent that this pandemic has been a forced change for what we're seeing in not just the wider world, but also in the IT industry as well. And there's a couple of key trends that I would say have been driven by COVID-19. The first trend is that COVID-19 has forced organizations almost overnight to move to a much more dispersed mobile workforce. So as offices around the globe have been closed and cities fall almost silent, that's meant that organizations have had to have their employees connecting to company resources from different locations, whether it be from home, whether it be from coffee shops or not, as the case may be, as those are also closed, but non-traditional environments. And that drives a whole raft of different concerns from a security perspective and a control perspective than having your users sitting in a controlled office-based environment where you can drive everything that you need. The second driver has very much been that workloads have been pushed to the cloud by necessity. It's been very easy for organizations to see cloud as being the solution to many of their problems, especially when they're forced with rapid change. However, and there's a big however here, what this is driven is a significant level of higher cost for organizations, and in many cases those costs are completely and totally unbudgeted. And the reason behind that is what we see data egress is absolutely a big cost driver for organizations. It's all very well moving workloads and data to the cloud, but as you move your data and those workloads in and out of the cloud, the cost levels absolutely ramp up. So we're now seeing these first waves and second waves of bills coming through, where organizations are sitting there and saying, wow, we thought the cloud was going to be cheaper than it actually is, and there's no predictability in terms of what we're seeing. So that's one of the major drivers. The second market trend that we're seeing, and this has become really relevant over lockdown, and even more so in many organizations, is that ransomware is becoming the new bank robbery, and there's no one that's safe. We've seen over the past weeks and past months a number of organizations that have been hit with ransomware attacks, and those organizations are right the way across the globe. So I know Equinix reported an attack down in Australia, New Zealand this past week. Probably one of the most high-profile companies that was breached or hit in recent months was Garmin, the fitness tracker people, and they allegedly paid a ransom in the region of $10 million US. There was also a really interesting and sad story over here in Europe this past week. A hospital in Germany got hit by ransomware. It took all of their systems down, and they were unable to provide critical care treatment to patients that needed it. And that actually led to at least one reported case of death, where one of the patients wasn't able to get the clinical treatment that they required and actually died whilst being transferred to another hospital that hadn't actually been attacked. So, you know, no organization is safe. It's pretty indiscriminate in terms of who's getting hit, and it's clearly a money-making operation for these organizations. And the interesting thing is that the company that was supposedly or allegedly behind the Garmin attack was a company called Evil Corp, which kind of sounds like it's a movie bad guy organization or a cartoon villain. But what we've got to be realistic about here is that actually, by paying them off, it actually goes beyond the financial implications. It's not the hundreds of thousands or the millions of dollars that get funneled to them by organizations that agree to pay. There's actually moral, ethical, and obviously brand ethical considerations as well, because many of these organizations are actually fronts for organized crime. So by funding them, by paying them, we're actually funding drugs trafficking, arms trafficking, and in many cases also human trafficking as well. So that's the balance between actually how can I pay to get my to get access to my files back if I'm hit, versus all of the other considerations around not just the lost cost and productivity, but also what does it mean to my brand if I'm seen to be, you know, paying an organization that's behind some of these horrible practices. So those are two pretty big considerations that we've got in the market today. And I now want to switch gear and talk a little bit about data in our modern world. I think the key thing here is that data is absolutely at the core of every business. And many people will argue it's actually the most valuable asset in an organization, and even more so than the people. You know, we always talk about human capital as being absolutely key, and it is. But if we think about data, and we think about the use of data in our life today, if I think about my social media profile, if I think about all of the things that I have from a shopping perspective, I get personalized recommendations based upon the things that I click like on, the things that I buy, and the things that I do. So therefore, that means that that's being powered by data being collated by organizations to provide me with that personalized experience. And that's me as a consumer. If we think about it from a business perspective, the data is critically valuable. Organizations can operate, run, and go and target their target audience. And the other key thing here is that if we think about the sheer volume of data that's being generated, that's growing exponentially. If I think about a survey that was done at the tail end of last year by IDC, they anticipated that somewhere in the region of 175 zettabytes of new data would be created each year by 2025. And to put that into context, that is 175 trillion gigabytes. And that's also new data. That would be data that is created by 2025. That's not including the existing data that's already floating around that we have today and will have in every year up until 2025. So it's an absolutely mind-boggling amount in terms of the volume of data that's going to be created. The other piece that's really important here is that the types of data that are being created are becoming much more disparate and dispersed. We've got, of course, our traditional structured data that comes out of our ERP or out of our workflow, but we have a huge volume of unstructured data, whether that be documents, whether it be sound, whether it be video. And actually, not all data is created equally. And different types of data provide different challenges in how businesses need to back them up, store them, and retrieve them. And let's also be really, really clear. The problem's not going to go away. We see technologies like IoT, we see technologies like 5G. All of those elements are going to really, really drive and accelerate this data world that we live in as more and more devices get connected. If I think about my car is connected and drives data. My refrigerator at home is connected. We have smart washing machines, we have smart heating, we have smart lighting systems. All of these things are creating and generating a whole pile more data than we've ever had before. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm now going to hand over to Brian Burns.
Okay, thanks very much, Justin, for the introduction. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Cloudian, and then my colleague, TC Wong, will talk a little bit more in detail. And then Rubrik is going to talk more about our combined solution. But before I start, I'd like to talk a little bit about our relationship. What we're here to talk about is Rubrik and Cloudian, and why we have a relationship. And why it is that there's so many companies around the world, Fortune 100 companies, Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 2000 companies. There's over 100 of these companies in the world that are using these two solutions together. And so if we ask ourselves why, at a very high level, you could say that these products just work very well together. But what I'd like to do is dig a little deeper and try to understand, why it is these products work so well together. I think at one level you can say that we have we have some real significant commonalities. One of them is a shared history. I think we have a very common, very similar way of looking at our product and designing our products, we have a very similar way of looking at the market. For example, I look at the Rubrik product and they talk about, absolute simplicity of operations. I think they call it something like drop dead operational simplicity. And in fact, that's pretty much the same thing we say about our product. We use different adjectives, but the fact is that is how it's one of the strongest differentiators for our product. Now, of course, all companies will tell you that they have. Could you please go back for a moment? Thanks. Let me take over the slide. So the we're talking about operational simplicity. I think all companies talk about operational simplicity. I think that we're unique in that we truly can prove this in many different ways. One of them is, of course, demonstrate to you, and we hope to have the opportunity to do that. But if you were, for example, to go to something called the Gartner Peer Insight website, and anyone can do it, it's an open website, and this is basically confirmed users of these different technologies who come in and offer evaluations of the technologies. And it's something that's always changing because people are new customers are constantly giving new evaluations. And any day of any year, we are always on the top, very often by a large margin. And if you look at why people are appreciating our technologies and what they like about it, it's largely because of ease of use. There's no coincidence that Rubrik themselves have a similar. If you were to go and compare, they're always on top of the Gartner Peer Insights, and people just love the ease of use. Now, if you dig a little deeper and try to understand why we're both so easy to use, one of the things that comes up is the fact that we were both uniquely born in the age of the cloud. If you look at most of our competitors, they were, created, they came into being long before the cloud existed. And so what does that really mean? And if you think about cloud, what the promise of the cloud, one of the greatest promises of the cloud was that it was going to completely relieve you of all the headaches that come with design or building in your own infrastructure. And so they really promised to simplify that, and I think they've done a great job of doing that. And so if you're to look at older technologies, NAS and SAN from a storage perspective, these were notoriously difficult to work with. But so older technologies, that's what they had to make things simpler than the existing technologies. We were both born in the cloud, and the cloud was giving the market the expectations that things would be this simple. And for us, we knew that we were going to be asking people to use us as an alternative to the cloud. Okay, they would have to be putting something in their own data center and connecting it and installing it. But our promise and our goal when we created that first product, that our goal was to create something that as soon as it was installed, everything beyond that was going to be as simple to use as a cloud. And I think we've delivered very well on that. And the Gartner Peer Insights are one example of how people agree with that. And so another aspect or way to look at that is around something called S3. And if you know much about Cloudian, you know that we are wholly focused on something called object storage. Our two founders were two object storage fanatics. Our CEO was someone who studied object storage at MIT years before it was even called object storage. And with his co-founder of this company, they had created the world's first multimedia messaging system, which allowed you to send things like videos and photos from one smartphone to another. And that was actually one of the world's first commercial implementations of object storage on telephony. And so the two of them, for those two people, their lives changed the moment they saw S3. because for them, S3 was the perfect example of what object storage should be. It was an open standard, so many different parties could come in and contribute to it. It was easy for applications to create compliance with, because they truly believed that if the cloud was going to become mainstream, and 10 years ago, there was no guarantee that the cloud would become mainstream. They believed that if it would become mainstream, then S3 would probably become the de facto standard in the world of the cloud. And if you fast forward 10 years, it is not only that lots of applications are supporting S3, there's actually thousands of applications that are supporting S3. And they're not just supporting it because they want to be part of AWS. They're basically supporting it, and that is true. If they want any application that wants to work in the cloud has to support S3. Okay, that's one reason. But a bigger reason, probably a more important reason, is S3 itself. The richness and extensibility of the API itself is so attractive. Applications realized that by adopting S3, they could basically tap into this incredibly rich and performant API. S3 is software defined and totally different to something like NFS, which essentially does three things: read, write, and delete. S3 does hundreds of different things, and these applications realized that they could use more and more and more of these features and functions to make their own product much more feature rich and much more performant and ultimately much more differentiated on the market. And that is exactly what Rubrik did. Many years ago, they made a strategic decision to embrace S3. And in doing so, they made one of the reasons why Rubrik is such a highly differentiated product is because of that choice. And so what that means in the context of Cloudian and Rubrik is, if we look at Cloudian and what we have done, we made a decision to create the world's first native S3 API. And essentially, it is a clone of AWS S3. We have 100 engineers which do nothing but make sure that we are as close to perfectly compliant with S3 as possible. S3 has hundreds of different commands. We support them all. We have a guarantee that anything that works on AWS will work with us. We also realize that S3 is a living and growing API, and there's new features and functions coming out all the time. And we will always be the first object storage to support those. And one great example is this very, very important feature which came out from AWS late last year called immutable object lock. And this is widely believed in the industry to be the only foolproof way to protect yourself against ransomware attacks. And we heard from Justin why ransomware is becoming so rampant today. A lot of it is because of people working at home. Remote workers have always been the easiest way for ransomware attackers to penetrate corporate servers, and that's one of the reasons why ransomware attacks have grown so much in the last 6 months. And so this is an example of the fact that we were able to support this weeks after AWS announced it. The next object storage company platform which was able to support this wasn't able to support it for about 8 months after, and that's one of the benefits of being a native S3 compliant, natively S3 compliant. So what does that mean with Rubrik and us? Well, as Rubrik uses more and more of the features and functions, it becomes more and more critical that the target they use is also a fully compliant target. So if you're going to be using Rubrik and Cloudian on premise, The only way that we believe that you can guarantee that is always going to work and always going to, it's going to be able to give you all the full features that Rubrik can offer is by using Cloudian. Okay, so that's a little background and some of the reasons why so many companies use our combined products worldwide, because they just work well together. So now I'm going to switch gears here and go into, the basic reason why we're all here, which is the fact that data is just growing like crazy. If we look at this graph here, we talked about, I remember in 2015, about 5 years ago, it was about 7 zettabytes per year were being added worldwide. And they said that that was going to grow to 70 zettabytes by this year. And I didn't believe it. But the fact is, we've already exceeded that. And so I do believe that by 2025, 175 zettabytes is absolutely possible. And a lot of it is because the types of data you see here on the right, this is essentially what we call unstructured data. Okay, it's fundamentally different than structured business data. And if you look at the growth here, the business data is basically growing almost linearly. The real growth, the real data growth is all in unstructured data. They say that 80% of all data growth is going to be, today, even today, 80% of all new data is unstructured, and 80% of all data stored today is stored on object storage. If you look at, say 10 years ago, it was a very limited number of industry verticals that were doing this type of data collection. But the fact is, today, as Justin mentioned, every vertical in the world, every company realizes that their future and their future growth and future success is all around data. So, well, I'll talk a little bit about our product and where we fit in this whole big new world. On the left, you see something called fast data, also referred to as performance storage. And there's companies like VMware, NetApp, and Pure Storage, which have these great solutions to allow you to do the type of things you truly need really fast data for. We don't do that. We do the rest. We do what is called capacity data. And as I mentioned earlier, this is where the growth is, okay? This is the unstructured data. It has fundamentally completely different needs than fast data. It needs limitless scalability. It needs much better cost economics, right? And so that is what we basically offer. So our product that we have is called HyperStore. And it can be delivered in either an appliance or software only. You could, if you use HP or Lenovo or Cisco or Dell, you can basically install our software and it will work. We're perfectly software defined. It's S3 compatible API. One way to describe our company is that Cloudian is a 100% S3 compatible cloud native object storage platform. And one of the benefits you get is a scale out architecture. This is in complete contrast to traditional things like NAS and SAN, where if you had 100 or 200 terabytes and you needed to add another 100 terabytes, you may have to completely scrap your old stuff, buy a new set of equipment, migrate everything over, and throw away your old equipment. And this is one of the reasons why cloud was so attractive. But the fact is that with object storage, you can have anything. You could have 200, 300, 400 terabytes. You need an extra terabyte, 100 terabytes. You just basically add a box of any size at any time and hook it up, click a mouse, and you're done. You not only have the additional capacity, but you also have additional performance, because that's the way object storage works. NAS, SAN, they would all often get slower and slower as you added more. And these are some of the reasons why all public clouds in the world have standardized on object storage, okay? We also allow you to tier directly into AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, Alibaba, and you can do that anytime you want. And we don't stamp the data, so yeah, it's always available to you. We don't tax you for tiering that out to the cloud. We also realize that not all workloads are S3, although there are thousands of applications and workloads and workflows that do support it. There still are a number of CIFS and NFS, and the file world is still out there. We provide at no cost, something that allows you basically a gateway into our platform called Hyperfile. That's basically our portfolio in a nutshell. So what we are is an on-premise S3 compatible enterprise storage. We are very simple to use, as I mentioned earlier. We are modular, as I mentioned earlier. We are the perfect solution for a hybrid because we can be used transparently between on-prem cloud storage and public cloud storage. You can start small, this is as small as 10 terabytes, and grow to an exabyte. We have many customers using us well in excess of 100 petabytes, some in many hundreds of petabytes. So if you look at this, you may ask yourself, we're basically giving you all the benefits of a public cloud on premise. So why not just use public cloud? As Justin mentioned earlier, it comes down to cost. If you're going to be hosting hundreds of terabytes or petabytes, the cost will very quickly go way beyond what you're budgeted for. And we are, and very simply, a small fraction of the cost of public cloud. And that includes, hardware, software, and support. And so this is some of the reasons why some of these companies on the right, and by the way, these are companies that are not only using Cloudian, but these are companies, just an example of some of the over 100 companies worldwide that are using Cloudian and Rubrik together. You see Motorola, Bloomberg, Zoom, 20th Century Fox, NBC, they're all Mercedes, Daimler, they're all major companies that are using us all around the world. MilCloud is a very interesting company. They are actually the US Department of Defense, the Pentagon. They actually had a serious security breach on AWS, and they decided to create their own private cloud. And they wanted something that looked and acted just like AWS, and so they adopted Cloudian. And they look and act just like AWS, but they only have 4 tenants: the US Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines. So these are just some examples of why we work so well together. At this point, I'm going to pass over to my colleague TC Wong, who's going to go into more detail. Thank you.
Hi, so I would like to share some time of explain a little bit how our scalability looks like. So as Brian has mentioned, so we're able to upgrade undisrupted upgrade of single click. So we begin with 3 nodes in the sense that as small as 3 nodes to up to 200 nodes that we have stress test, and it's about 3 exabyte. That's the maximum of we have tested it out in a single system. So with what it means that you do not need to upgrade. And can we tab it out first all the way? Sorry. Yeah, just yeah. So virtually we probably don't need to upgrade by adding nodes in the whole clusters. So what happened is now in object storage, the connectivity is by endpoints. So with a single global namespace or single endpoints, your applications can connect to exabytes of data, petabytes of data, exabytes of data without any migration or require or any change of model. Because from a traditional storage standpoint, you always start from like, model A, where you support up to certain capacity. And then later you need to change to maybe a model N or model T or whatever different model. So, but what is the challenge of it? The end user will face is the migration part, because the application is connecting to the same endpoints or the same destination target. So you have a challenge of migrate if your cluster doesn't scale accordingly. So that's how we can do up to petabytes and zettabytes of exabytes of upgrade we have stress test under. So next, please. So here we just have a recap of what is our Cloudian value as Brian has briefed it out. So we can connect not only from S3 of the object storage, we also can connect from the SMB and NFS using our hyperfile. So I will be going through from the top left, first row, and to the bottom right. So the second value of it, we have a policy-based data protection. That means that we can control something called erasure coding and replication factor based on our storage policy. So it depends on your object size and object of data. So you can configure mixed storage policy within the same cluster. So there's one of our unique differences. So as we all know, more and more workloads are moving into analytics. So our Cloudian Hyperstore also supports the data analytics where people do metadata crunching, whether it's through Elasticsearch or Splunk. So all these advanced analytics solution we are supported. So, and there's one of our other use case beside the backup, which we're going to talk today here. So as Brian mentioned, we have policy-based tiering to the public cloud where we can tier to Azure, Google Cloud, AWS S3, and AWS Glacier, and also Ali Cloud, which we have been tested. So we have also been set up a hybrid cloud and a multi-cloud environment where we can deploy our Hyperstore software on some of these public cloud and create a multi-cloud environment. So we have flexible deploy options, as we have mentioned that we have appliances mode. So we also have software of common x86 platform. And we also can do something upcoming already is the Kubernetes environment. So we can deploy in containers mode as well. So, of course, as Brian has repeatedly mentioned, when we add our nodes, our performance goes up accordingly. So because within our cluster, the more nodes we add, the more performance you will get. So that's one of our differences compared to traditional SAN or NAS-based blockage. So 100% native S3 API. So there's one of our features that most of our customers utilize and work on it, because we all see that the storage is not about capacity anymore. So it's about how we can integrate with your application. Rubik later will give a very good example how we work perfectly with AWS S3 because of this native S3 API. So with more and more advanced from the application world, Brian has mentioned before as well for the immutable features. So application vendors, we realize have been coded more and more with reference with AWS S3. So it's not about protocol access anymore. It's about the compatibility of the S3 API. That's the application vendor concerned about for the object storage. So we also have a bucket level storage policy where our storage policy, as mentioned just now created, we can assign to each of the user and they have the bucket. So you can have user number one, we have, replication factor because they are running example CDN with a smaller object, but you have a backup object here which is larger, so we can create another bucket which handle for the backup objects. So multi-tenancy, QoS, and billing are our embedded features. So there's no additional license features required. And because one of our largest sector of customer using is the service provider level, whether it's provide backup as a service with Rubrik, or maybe using a Splunk offload, or maybe using a lot of analytics usage. So our cluster is meant for multi-mixed workload and also different workload combined together to form a cluster. And most of our customer as well, it started with one simple workload like backup, but end up is consolidating more of the file sync and share, analytic workloads and stuff like that. So our product actually is support multi-tenancy just like a public cloud. In fact, the easiest to think of it is we are the on-premise AWS S3 that can be used. So one of our enterprise features is support the smart support that we can do is our data, our support team will able to see the health check for your clusters. So we have a monthly report, we can have a monthly report of your health situation. And last but not least, we are built for scale, and as mentioned before, we can scale up to in a single system, single cluster, we can scale up to 200 nodes and exabyte of data. So with that, I'll pass it to Ruby now. Thank you.
So thank you, Justin, Brian, and TC for that introduction. I'm Sol, System Engineering Lead supporting Asia region. Very glad to be here today. So in the next few slides, I'll walk you through from a solution perspective, how Rubrik and Cloudian works together to be able to help you to simplify your data center data management from a data protection perspective. And of course, how we further integrate to help you to manage your data from on-prems and into the cloud. Right, so we begin this strategic relationship from the beginning of our journey, right? So as you hear from both Justin and Brian, the data has been growing tremendously over the past many years, and it's almost doubling over almost every year. So data center is really having a great challenge in managing such tremendous amount of data. Especially we are looking at cloud transformation as part of journey when you're trying to utilize different use cases and you're trying to move your data across different endpoints and into the cloud, from on-prem and into the cloud. How do you effectively manage that data lifecycle? So Rubrik and Cloudian fundamentally takes the similar approach in our architectural design. So we work with Cloudians mainly because of the key strategic advantage and integrations. Cloudian with limitless capacity, you can actually start small and grow without any limit, right? You can have archival of the long-term retention into Cloudian, right? So for start, we ingest the data from it can be a NAS, or in any platforms of it can be a virtual private cloud environment, it can be a unstructured data on a NAS, it can be any other hypervisors of physical Linux or Windows or Unix machine. We ingest it into a Rubrik Cloud Data Management cluster for short-term retention, short to mid-term retention. And of course, you can set instant archival into a Cloudian, right? Or you can actually archive it after a specific period of time, maybe 7 days or 14 days and so on. And then we manage that from a Rubrik automated policy management. You can manage the data retention and the data lifecycle from Cloudians and into the cloud as well. Right, so it's highly performance or superior RTO or RPO, right? So once we archive it into Cloudian, you know, any request of the data, we can actually download it into Rubrik and live mount it on our flash tier and present it to our customers for analytics, for development testing, for DR instant recovery purpose, right? So that really keeps your data center in compliance, and of course, is a cost-effective solutions, as Brian has mentioned. Next slide, please. Right, so beside extending the capabilities of you know, cloud for long-term archival, so Rubrik also uniquely to be able to convert any the on-prem VM images to automate that conversions into a cloud instance in AWS, in Azure. So we strategically work with Cloudian, right, to be able to automate the process of conversions of the on-premise VMs into the cloud instance on demand, right? So in this particular diagram, as you can see, right, so we ingest the snapshots from your virtual environment and archive it into a Cloudian. So as and when a request for, you know, a cloud conversion, customer can then on demand, you know, request that that image to be loaded back into Rubrik, and then convert it in the AWS into a cloud native instance. In this case, a VMDK into AMI, and then you have the abilities to power on the workload in a cloud, right, for development testing, for DR purpose, or for analytics and so on, right? So that really allows our customers to be able to, eliminate that storage costs in the cloud, retain the control of the data on-premise, at the same time leveraging on our cloud conversions, which is cloud-on's capability in the cloud, to be instantiate that converted AMI instance for different types of use cases, maybe development testing, maybe running reporting, analytics, and so on within the cloud environment. Next. So let's take a look take a step back and look at from a data management, data protection perspective, what for the past 20 years, what's the challenges of our customers, what our customers is facing. If you look at it, it's still a complex three-tier architectures today. If you look at a single dependency from a three-tier architecture perspective, you have to have a single master with a single dependency of a catalog. You need to deploy your media manager, backup proxies, which consume the VM host resource utilizations and so on. Right? Even with the for the past 10 years with the evolutions of a disk-based backup technology, OST integrations, or even VTL and so on, that really doesn't really change the complexity of that three-tier architecture. So what Rubrik comes in, aim to be able to help our customers to simplify and modernize that backup architectures, and we simply put it into a single software fabric. Next. Right, so a few click more. Yes, we converge that's 4 to 6 different components in that three-tier complexity into a single software fabric, and we can put it into a scale architecture. In this case, that can be a Rubrik appliance, or you can actually put that into a third-party hardware, a certified third-party hardware that can be a Dell, HPE, and so on. So we support heterogeneous environment that can be a VM, Unix, or Linux, or bare metal. And we set a long-term archive into Cloudian. And as I mentioned earlier, Cloudian can then scale up with limitless capacity, right? So any long-term archival, we can then leverage on Cloudian for a long-term retention lifecycle management. Next. So with that, just to summarize from a solution perspective, that's clearly a lot of advantage in this partnership. Rubrik is able to scale out as we scale out our nodes. We start with 4 nodes erasure code, and then subsequently you can actually add nodes to that scale architectures. As we scale it up, we are able to scale that flash tier, the SSD tier, for parallel ingestions of your snapshots from your data center environment. We always perform a first time full and forever incremental. And then subsequently, you can actually live mount it on our flash tier without incurring additional production capacity at the front end, right? So, and then we leverage on Cloudians to be able to perform archival. It's a policy-based kind of a backup, archive, and replication approach that's able to help us to scale to petabytes in a very cost-effective manner. So that really helps to solve not only the data management pain point on data management, but also for your data centers compliance with Rubrik's immutable architectures, which we deploy immutable distributed file systems together with our zero trust cluster design and our API authentications across all nodes within the cluster. Working with Cloudian, that further enhance that immutability on our backup data for our customers for long-term archival locations. Next. So just to summarize the benefits of Rubrik and Cloudian's collaborations, It's very easy to deploy, as I mentioned earlier. Fundamentally, we take the same approach in our architectural design. With Rubrik, you can auto-discover the complete infrastructure. We take a very simple and declarative approach as compared to the traditional way of imperative approach. We are able to set the policy at the a host level, and any new VMs that's being discovered can then inherit from that policies, right? So inheritance of the policies. And that really helps you to eliminate a lot of manual performance tuning. You no longer you have to just manually set and tune the data buffers at different tier. And it's very simple to scale. Together with Cloudian, we both take the same approach of a scale architecture, so you can grow alongside with together with your workload. And it's a very cost-effective solutions to be able to help our customers to lower the TCO, not just from a data center footprint facility point of view, but of course improving your productivity from a FTE full-time equivalent perspective, from a productivity perspective as well. So it's simple, automated, and we are able to help you to orchestrate your data services from on-prem and across hybrid multi-cloud environment. Next. So this is a very good use case. It's actually one of the service provider that is based in the UK, having a subsidiary in US. So we work together to be able to provide backup as a service, right? So Rubrik and Cloudian together offer a very robust and a very simple solution that really helps the service providers, customers to save costs by reducing complexity. And it's a very cost-effective solutions, not only to be able to scale in a very limitless manner, but also providing a very simple way to manage data protection, data management for our front-end customers. Next. So with that, we end our presentation, and I'm very glad to be here speaking to all of you, especially together with our partner, Cloudian, Brian, and TC, as well as Justin from Exclusive Network. Back to you, Justin. Back to you, Justin.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I had a bit of a technology fail in terms of not being able to find the unmute button on my screen. So thank you very much to Brian, TC, and so I'm just going to spend a couple of moments summarising and closing before we just check to see if there's any questions that we need to answer in the Q&A box. So I think what we've seen and what we've heard over the last 55 minutes is that the pace of data growth is continuing to accelerate rapidly, and it's showing no signs of abating. That level of data growth is going to continue accelerating over the course of the coming years, and that obviously causes a challenge for all organizations in terms of how they scale up and how they scale out and how they handle different types of data. The second component is that actually securing the data is going to be absolutely critical. It is the lifeblood of the organization, but also being able to unlock its potential is really going to be the thing that, in a world of business agility and speed, is going to really help us to define who the winners and losers are going to be in the market. It's not good enough to be able to just throw all of your data into a big pot and not be able to access it and not be able to drive the right level of business intelligence and analytics that are going to give you a competitive edge in the market. And I think that what we've seen today is that it's very, very clear that both Rubrik and Cloudian are phenomenal organizations. They've got amazing technology, market leading and best in class, and individually they have solutions that are absolutely fantastic and market leading. However, when we see bringing them together, Rubrik with Cloudian, that drives an even more compelling and really strong proposition that drives significant levels of business benefit and value to you and your organizations. So with that, I'm going to see if we've got any questions that we need to answer in the Q&A session. If there are, please do add them either in the Q&A box or in the chat screen. So I'll give it a moment just to see if there's anything that comes through. I can't see any questions. Sharon, is that the same for you?
Yeah, so far there's no question from the attendees.
Okay, so in that case, we will give you a couple of moments of your day back, and just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to spend with us, and I hope it's been informative on behalf of Exclusive Networks, Rubrik and Cloudian. Thank you very much and good morning to you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.